All right, so we've now roped in anti-apartheid activist and chair of the Archbishop Tutu Intellectual Property Trust, Dr. Mamphela Ramphele. Dr. Ramphele, thank you so much for your time. You've long maintained that the TRC was not the end, but the beginning of a moral reckoning for South Africa. With this judicial inquiry now finally being established, what must this judicial inquiry achieve, do you think, for you, and for it to be more than just a symbolic gesture? I mean, nearly 30 years after the TRC's establishment.
Well, anybody who remembers the behavior of the ANC vis-a-vis the TRC would be very skeptical about why at this late hour is President Ramaphosa wanting to set up a judicial inquiry on matters that are before the courts already. Let's remember, the ANC refused to collaborate with the TRC from the beginning. They refused to accept accountability for the individuals for abuses of human rights, as was the brief of the TRC. Second, President Mbeki refused, in fact, went to the courts to stop the release of the TRC, which failed, and the report was released, and President Mandela was very much in favor of the release of the report. Then Pigoli, who was the head of the MPA, was blocked systematically by Minister Mabandla under President Mbeki from pursuing those who had not gotten amnesty or those who didn't even apply. And finally, we have President de Klerk on his deathbed releasing the explanation that in fact there was a gentleman's agreement that no political actor was going to be held accountable for the crimes against humanity as part of the settlement, which boggles the mind. But finally, Vincent Magwenya must explain to Mr. and Mrs. South Africa why they should trust that this Commission of Inquiry and its recommendations will receive the attention it deserves when we spend R1 billion as a society to fund state capture report, which the Chief Justice worked so hard, the Zondo Commission. The report is still not visibly being applied. Instead, President Ramaphosa has appointed people who were fingered in that report, in his cabinet, and some of them are in parliament. Yeah. Why must I, as a citizen who is really ashamed of the delay in justice for the likes of Alata and others, I just believe that those families should say no to the inquiry and insist on their right to have that settled.
Especially when you consider that there are no real clear time frames, as I've posed that question to Vincent Magwenya earlier on. Just talking about the families, the 25 families who brought this court case speak of decades of trauma and erasure. What does true restorative justice look like for them today? I mean, is it prosecution? Is it reparation? Public acknowledgement, perhaps? Or is it something deeper?
I've always maintained that the first thing about trauma is acknowledgement. And the ANC refuses to acknowledge the trauma it has visited on people in exile, but also the trauma it has visited on people here in South Africa post-1994 through delayed justice. Justice delayed is justice denied. And third, the ANC has a culture of failure to be accountable. The idea of collective accountability is it's a nonsense because it shields members of the party from becoming accountable. This is the reason why the Zondo report is being held in abeyance by the same president who now wants us to entrust him with a 3 decades long delayed justice process. I just hope that each and every one of those families must insist on the Constitutional Court settling this matter and not taking it back into the political process. The ANC must, for a change, accept accountability. And this president, what he's trying to do is to shield the ANC from being exposed for its failure to make sure that people get justice.
I want to stay on that point of accountability and perhaps also revisit, Dr. Ramphele, what you said earlier on. So in this inquiry, we understand it will also look into investigate allegations of improper influence, as we've heard, to prevent the prosecution of these apartheid-era crimes. You've also called the state's failure to act on the TRC referrals a betrayal. What, in your view, then allowed that betrayal to persist for decades across successive democratic government? You mentioned, of course, that the ANC now must take accountability.
Well, the betrayal comes from the love by the ANC of power over and above justice. That's become very clear if you look at the history of governance in our country post-1994. They would rather protect their politically connected people than see them being held accountable. It started with Nkosazana Zuma with that big kadunte of giving money for a play, which was really wasteful expenditure. And instead of saying to her, that's not the way to do it, she was protected and continued to be a cabinet minister. We've had a long history of this. And President Mbeki really is amazing that he should even try and deny this when he was the man who even tried to stop the report from being released. So I just believe that South Africa deserves to see the end of this road. This unfinished business of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission must not be blocked by this bureaucratic institution of commissions of inquiry. There is no need for inquiry into whether or not Thabo Mbeki blocked this. De Klerk tells us that. He can't just manufacture this. Bigoli tells us this. So why are we wasting money on proving what is obvious? That's how it rolled out. So we just have, as South Africans, to insist on the ANC for a change, to take accountability and allow those who are found guilty of human rights abuses and corruption and many other things that are part and parcel of the poor quality of governance we have received under the ANC. Yeah. They have to be held accountable.
I mean, in terms of what you're saying now, it does beg the question, and perhaps it does put a light in terms of how difficult it would be for people to reconcile the ANC government's, legacy, liberation legacy, that is, with its inaction now, as you say, on the TRC's justice recommendation. What is that a level of, do you think? I mean, is it a level of complacency? It could surely not be, complicity. You've reflected on how the Arch would have reacted to this case by the families. I mean, what would he say, given just this, this concern of where do we reconcile this position by the ANC?
Let's be very clear that the ANC was not the only actor in terms of the liberation process. They participated, yes. They played an important role, yes. But the abuse of power by the ANC in exile is recorded in books that have been written about the Lusaka years. So the fact that you were in the liberation process doesn't give you the license to abuse human rights. Post-1994, we have seen the ANC abusing its position of power in terms of state capture, which didn't start with Zuma, it started with the arms deal. And every time people tried to hold the ANC accountable, they were punished. People have gone into exile, some have left government because of this failure to accept accountability. So for me, the betrayal of the ANC is a betrayal of its own ideals, but more importantly now, is a betrayal of the very sense of the freedom that so many died fighting for. Not just ANC people. People inside the country played a much bigger role than they are acknowledged for. The people like Busak and who were in the UDF, the amount of risk that people took inside the country. And we know that some of the people in exile were double agents. So we really have to accept that all of us played different roles, some more than others, but there was no sole liberator. I am not liberated by anybody except by the collective actions of all of us. And therefore, when it comes to accountability, we cannot say because they liberated. We were not liberated by them. Right. They played a role in the liberation struggle. Mandela has said that over and over again. We now have to hold the ANC accountable.
Yeah.
And they have to accept that.
Dr. Ramphele, thank you so much for your voice and, of course, your time. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, she is, of course, the chair of the Archbishop Tutu Intellectual Property Trust, as well as an anti-apartheid activist, commenting there following that announcement by President Cyril Ramaphosa, set to establish a judicial commission of inquiry into the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, delayed cases rather that were referred to the National Prosecuting Authority.